The rain poured down in thick sheets, drumming against the pavement and turning the city streets into a maze of shimmering reflections. A cold wind howled through the alleyways, making the night feel even darker, lonelier, amid the chaos of honking, cars, and hurried footsteps. A small boy sat curled up against the side of a building, his tiny frame shaking from both the cold and the quiet sobs escaping his lips. He was no more than 7 or 8 years old, his clothes torn, his face smeared with dirt, his eyes filled with a sadness that no child should ever have to carry. People walked past him without a second glance, their umbrellas shielding them from the downpour, but also from the sight of his suffering. Some muttered under their breath, others simply looked away. But then, one man stopped. He was tall, dressed in an expensive black coat, the kind that only the wealthiest could afford. His polished shoes barely made a sound as he stepped closer. He was a man who had seen the world, who had built an empire from nothing, and yet in this moment, all of that meant nothing, because right now, all he could see was a child alone in the rain, abandoned by the world. Kneeling down, he spoke in a voice that was both gentle and firm. "Hey, kid, what's your name?" The boy sniffled, hesitating, as if unsure whether to trust him. His voice was barely above a whisper. I don't have a name." The man frowned. "Everyone has a name." The boy only shook his head, pulling his knees closer to his chest. His entire body trembled, not just from the cold, but from something deeper, fear, hopelessness. The man studied him for a long moment before taking off his coat and draping it over the child's shoulders. "Come with me," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You shouldn't be here." The boy looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of cruelty or deception, but all he saw was something unfamiliar, kindness. Slowly, hesitantly, he reached out and took the man's hand. The car waiting at the curb was sleek, the kind of vehicle most people only ever saw in magazines. The chauffeur opened the door, glancing at the boy with curiosity, but saying nothing. As they drove through the city, the boy stared out the window, watching the bright lights blur past. He had never been inside a car like this. He had never been anywhere, except the streets. After what felt like an eternity, the car pulled into a long driveway, leading up to a mansion that looked like something out of a dream. Tall iron gates parted as they approached, revealing a vast estate surrounded by perfectly trimmed hedges and glowing lanterns lining the path. The boy's breath hitched in his throat. He had never seen anything like this. The man led him inside, where warmth instantly embraced them. A grand chandelier hung from the ceiling, its crystals catching the light in a way that made the entire room shimmer. The air smelled like something sweet, something comforting. For the first time in a long time, the boy didn't feel cold. A woman approached, dressed in a uniform, her expression one of surprise. "Sir, who is this?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to the boy. "You don't have a name." The boy hesitated, then shook his head. "Then we'll give you one," the man said. The boy stared at him, his lips parting slightly, as if to say something, but no words came out. He had spent so long feeling invisible, forgotten, and now here was this stranger, offering him not just shelter, but an identity, a place in the world. For a moment, the warmth of the house, the softness of the coat around his shoulders, the man's calm presence, it all felt too good to be real, as if he would wake up any second back in the rain, alone once more. And yet, it wasn't a dream. "Welcome home," the man said. But what the boy didn't know yet was that this mansion held secrets of its own, and his arrival would change everything. This ending leaves just the right amount of suspense to make viewers want to watch more. Let me know if you need any tweaks. The boy stood at the entrance of the mansion, his small frame barely moving, as he took in everything around him. The warmth, the brightness, the sheer size of the place. It was all too much. His fingers clutched at the fabric of the coat draped over his shoulders, as if holding onto something solid would keep him from floating away in this dreamlike moment. The man, still watching him closely, gestured for the housekeeper to come forward. "Prepare a room for him," he said. "Make sure he's comfortable." The woman hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Of course, sir." The boy's legs felt stiff as he followed her up the grand staircase. His bare feet barely made a sound against the plush carpet. He had never walked on anything so soft before. The long hallways stretched endlessly, doors leading to rooms bigger than any space he had ever called home. When they finally stopped, the woman pushed open a door, revealing a room that looked too perfect to be real. The bed was massive, covered in blankets that looked softer than clouds. A large window overlooked a beautiful garden, the raindrops still trickling down the glass. "This is yours now," she said gently. But there was something in her voice, like she too was uncertain about all of this. The boy hesitated, his fingers tightening around the coat. Why is he helping me?" His voice was small, afraid of the answer. The housekeeper gave him a strange look, as if she wanted to say something, but held back. "He's a good man," she finally said. "Now get some rest." But sleep did not come easily that night. The boy lay in the massive bed, staring up at the ceiling, his mind racing. He had spent his whole life being ignored, being told he was nothing. Now suddenly, someone cared. Someone had given him a home. It didn't feel real, and a part of him feared that by morning it would all disappear. The next day, everything felt even more surreal. Clothes had been set out for him, new ones, warm and soft. He changed slowly, staring at himself in the mirror. He almost didn't recognize the boy looking back at him. Downstairs, breakfast was waiting, the long dining table stretched out before him, filled with food he had never even dreamed of eating. The man sat at the head of the table, reading a newspaper, but when the boy entered, he lowered it and gave him a nod. "Sit," he said. The boy hesitated before slowly pulling out a chair. He didn't touch the food at first, afraid he wasn't allowed, but the man noticed and simply gestured toward the plates. "Go on, eat." It took only one bite for the hunger in him to take over. He had never eaten so much in his life, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, he felt full. The man watched him carefully. "I don't expect anything from you," he said suddenly, as if reading the boy's mind. "I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything." The boy swallowed. Then, "Why?" the man exhaled, setting his newspaper down. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then finally he spoke. "Because I know what it's like to have nothing." The boy's eyes widened. That wasn't the answer he had expected. The man leaned back in his chair, staring out the large windows. "I wasn't always wealthy. I wasn't born into this life." His voice was calm, but there was something hidden underneath, something heavy. "I grew up on the streets too, just like you." The boy froze, staring at him in disbelief. "I was abandoned as a child," the man continued. "I survived by doing whatever I had to. But one day, someone gave me a chance, just like I'm giving you one now." His gaze returned to the boy, and that changed everything. For the first time since stepping into this house, the boy felt something unfamiliar, hope. Days turned into weeks. The boy was no longer a stranger in the mansion. He had a name now, one the man had carefully chosen for him. He had a place here. He had clothes, food, warmth. But more than anything, he had someone who cared. Yet, deep down, something still unsettled him. He noticed the way the servants looked at him sometimes, whispering behind closed doors, casting glances when they thought he wasn't looking. Even the housekeeper, who had been kind to him, seemed hesitant at times. And the man, though he was good to him, there was something in his eyes, a quiet sadness that never truly left. One night the boy couldn't sleep. He wandered the halls, the silence of the mansion pressing in on him. That was when he saw it, the door at the end of the hallway, slightly ajar, a dim light spilling through the crack. Curious, he stepped closer. Inside, the man stood in front of a large portrait, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The boy couldn't see the painting clearly, but he could tell it was important. The man stared at it, his expression unreadable. "Who is that?" the boy finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't flinch. He didn't even turn around. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then he spoke, "My son." The boy blinked in surprise. He had never heard the man talk about a son. "Where is he?" the boy asked hesitantly. The man was quiet for a long time. Then finally he turned. And for the first time since they had met, the boy saw something in his eyes that sent a shiver down his spine. "He's gone," the man said. "And he's never coming back." The room suddenly felt colder, the air heavier. The boy didn't know why, but in that moment, he felt like he had just stepped into something much bigger than himself. Something he didn't understand yet, and deep inside, a new question started to grow. Was he really here because the man wanted to help him, or was he here to replace someone else? The boy stood frozen, the man's words lingering in the air like an unfinished sentence. "He's gone, and he's never coming back." Something about the way he said it sent a chill through him. It wasn't just grief. It was something heavier, something unsaid. The man turned away, finishing his drink in one slow sip, before setting the glass down on a nearby table. "It's late," he said, his voice quieter now, almost distant. "You should go back to bed." The boy wanted to ask more. He wanted to know what had happened to the son in the painting, why no one in the house spoke of him, why even mentioning him seemed to change the air in the room. But something in the man's face told him that he wouldn't get any answers tonight. So he nodded and quietly slipped out, but sleep never came. In the days that followed, the boy couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important. Every glance from the house staff, every hushed conversation behind closed doors, every flicker of sadness in the man's eyes, it all added up to a puzzle he couldn't quite piece together. Then, one evening, as he wandered the halls again, he heard voices coming from behind a partially open door. He recognized the housekeeper's voice first. "Sir, are you sure about this?" she asked, worry thick in her tone. The man's voice came next, low and unreadable. "He deserves a chance. He's just a child," the housekeeper pressed. "What if he finds out?" The boy's breath hitched. "Finds out what?" He stepped closer, careful not to make a sound. But before he could hear more, the floor creaked beneath his foot. The voices stopped. A moment later, the door swung open, and the man stood there, his sharp eyes locking onto the boy. For the first time since the night he was brought here, the boy felt small again. "Come in," the man said. It wasn't a request. The boy stepped inside, his heart pounding. The housekeeper looked uneasy, but she said nothing as the man gestured toward a chair. "Sit." The boy obeyed, his fingers gripping the edge of his sleeves. What's going on?" he asked hesitantly. The man exhaled, as if deciding how much to say. Then, finally he spoke. "You remind me of him." The boy swallowed hard. He didn't have to ask who he meant. "My son Daniel." The man continued, his voice laced with something unreadable. He was about your age when everything changed. The boy listened, barely daring to breathe. One night, he disappeared. The man's fingers curled slightly against the wooden desk. No warning, no sign of where he went. One moment, he was here, and the next, he was gone. His jaw tightened. We searched everywhere, for years, but nothing. The boy felt a lump form in his throat. I don't know if he ran away, or if something happened to him, the man admitted, his voice lower now. But the not knowing, it eats away at you. He let out a heavy breath. And then I saw you, alone in the rain. His gaze met the boy's, steady and unshaken. And for the first time in years, I saw a chance to do something right. The boy's throat felt tight. Sir, I'm not replacing him. The man shook his head. No one could ever replace him. Just like no one can replace you. The boy hadn't realized he was holding his breath until he finally exhaled. For so long, he had wondered why the man took him in. Why a stranger would care about him when the world had never even looked twice. Now he understood. It wasn't just about kindness. It was about loss, about healing, about second chances. The housekeeper finally spoke, her voice softer now. You're not here to fill an empty space. You're here because he wanted to give you what no one gave him. The boy felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Belonging. The days after that felt different. The weight he had been carrying, the fear that this was all temporary, that one day he would be sent away, started to fade. The house didn't feel as big and cold anymore. The whispers from the staff weren't so unsettling, and the man, though still reserved, seemed lighter. One afternoon, the boy found himself standing in front of the painting again, studying the face of the son who had vanished. He traced the edge of the frame with his fingers and whispered under his breath, I hope you found your way home, wherever you are. And maybe, in a way, he had too.